We got one more guest here for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number 1 on Twitter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Adam, doing well. How about yourself, sir?
Doing very well, bud. Appreciate the time as always here. And let's go ahead and dive right into this NFL Week 16 card. And, I was just talking with Brian about the Tampa Bay and Dallas game and how I feel like there's not really that must-win premium that we generally see at this time of the year. Do you look at this card and see a whole lot of games where we kind of have that premium factored into the line, or not really?
Yeah, it seems like with a lot of these, and Tampa Bay and Dallas is an example. I mean, Tampa Bay is obviously out of it, officially eliminated from the playoffs as of last week. But are they necessarily going to mail it in? I mean, because they are playing the Cowboys. Do they get up to this and say, hey, we can beat the Dallas Cowboys because they're the Dallas Cowboys? And I mean, Dallas still does have a game lead in the East. I mean, and I think you see Washington, even though they won last week, there's not a lot of expectations in the market for Washington, considering they are, 10-point underdogs at Tennessee, who's kind of a boilerplate team, even though they're fighting for a playoff spot. But, you're really not seeing a lot of these here. I think teams kind of know where they are, and I think, maybe with Dallas that line is moving a little bit towards them too because, A, they have something to play for, but, Philadelphia, I think bettors in the market, at least early on, are looking at Philadelphia and thinking, hey, this team's rejuvenated with Nick Foles at quarterback, and the fact that it came out pick, it was 1.5 yesterday, and I'm looking and seeing 2s and 2.5. So, I mean, I think that's what could be driving the line, where it's like Dallas knows that they got to get a little bit serious here, I guess, or at least that's what the bettors are thinking.
Well, and as I'm looking at the card here, I think one game that really shows this premium markup is game 119-120 between Cincinnati and Cleveland. These two teams played in Cincinnati back on November 25th. The game closed in the pick'em range down in Cincinnati. You flip home field and all that type of thing. You've got maybe Browns -5.5, -6, something like that. Here we see the Browns being bet up to 9 out there in the market some places now. Even a straight 10 with a teaser protection line over at 5 dimes. I got to say, I mean, look, I get it. And the Browns do have a roundabout backdoor way into the playoffs if they win the next 2 weeks. But this is a Cincinnati team that was only a 6.5-point dog at Baltimore November 18th. And this feels like a game where the line is kind of getting some of that inflation that we see at this time of the year. Not to say I want to step in front of Cleveland necessarily, but man, Cleveland laying 8.5 or 9. I mean, they've been back since 1999. They're laying more than a touchdown for the 7th time in about 20 years. So that feels like one to me where it's just getting overpriced.
Yeah, I think I saw and I wrote a write-up for our Point Spread Weekly newsletter for VSiN this week on the NFL games. And I believe this is the biggest favorite Cleveland has been since December of 2013. So it's been a long time when they were playing Jacksonville. And it's been a long time since Cleveland has kind of been in this position where they actually have expectations. And they're a very comfortable favorite as they are here. I mean, I certainly, maybe you don't want to step in front of Cleveland, but I certainly wouldn't lay these points here. And I think Cincinnati, even though they are out of the playoff chase, they still may get up for this one. In the fact that, this is the rematch of kind of after that awkward exchange between Hugh Jackson and Baker Mayfield, and then Baker Mayfield's comments after the game. And, I think, maybe if Cincinnati has any pride, who knows what's going to happen with Marvin Lewis's job status. But, I mean, it would be Cincinnati or nothing here.
you just still there's just something about this team where I mean, how can you trust the Browns laying more than a touchdown? I mean, they haven't laid 9 points since 2010 against Carolina in Week 12, and that's the number that they're laying here this week. So this is one of those ones where you get that must-win inflation sort of angle there, and this is a Cincinnati team. Let's be honest, they've played pretty well the last 3 weeks, honestly. So I don't know, man, but these are the situations in Week 16, Week 17 that you're going to run into where you have to guess if a team is going to show up. And if you think a team is going to show up, there's probably value on them in an underdog role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're seeing in a few of these games where you have a team still alive for the playoffs and then a team that's out of it. And I think that the natural inclination for us is to say, hey, this other team is not going to show up. I mean, that because they're out of it, that they're just going to stop playing. And, that's one thing we've seen with San Francisco, and we saw it last year. They were 1-10 and then went on to win their last 5 games. This year so far, they were 2-10, and they've won 2 straight against Seattle and Denver at home, both as home underdogs, and they're in the same spot today or this week with the Bears coming in. Now, the Bears still have maybe an outside shot at a home field advantage, but you got a Bears team that's already clinched their division. And, the 49ers, continue to play with pride, and that's not a team I would necessarily want to fade in this spot either.
Yeah, and I did want to touch on that game a little bit more with you here, so go ahead and do that because, last week we saw money come in on San Francisco against Seattle. And I think a large part of that was a fade of the Seahawks coming off of Monday Night Football and, the fact that maybe they were a little bit of a misleading, ATS winner there in that game. Maybe people looking to fade Seattle just in general. And it kind of felt like a one-off type of situation. But then here this week, San Francisco takes money again, down from 5 to 3.5 at open. We have moved back up to 4. But this is kind of the question is, do people really like San Francisco, or has this been a fade of the spots for Seattle and Chicago? I think that's what you got to try to figure out here.
I think really it's a little bit of both. I mean, I wish it were really one or the other to provide a better explanation. But, I mean, the 49ers do finish strong. They did the same thing last year. And I think that shows a good thing going forward about their culture, with Kyle Shanahan and with John Lynch running the player personnel, is that they at least have a culture. And their culture is, that they're going to play hard every single week. And, I mean, they've had some tough luck and then losing Garoppolo early in the season and, now on the kind of their third quarterback. But I think, this team continues to play hard. And this isn't an easy game when you go in there. I don't care what kind of spot you're in. It's not been an easy game down the stretch of these past couple seasons, and I don't think it will be on Sunday either.
All right, so let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts, a team that you know very well, a team that's been a very pleasant surprise here this year. Offensively, Andrew Luck has been better than any of us could have imagined, and certainly with the workload that he's had throwing the football, great to see him stay healthy. But really, it's this Colts defense and the improvement on that side of the football that is the reason why they're in the playoff picture here. They're laying 9 points against the Giants. They're about to be favored for the 3rd time this season by more than a touchdown, something that they hadn't been since Week 17 of the 2014 season. Is this one of those lines that has some of that premium inflation to it, or is it a justified number?
I think it does a little bit. I mean, my initial inclination was looking last week, one of my favorite plays was the Colts over Dallas because I felt that Dallas was kind of a team that was getting to be a hot team. They had put up, darn near 600 yards on the Eagles, and that was by far their best offensive performance of the season. And so all the media and all the pundits were going to fall in love with Dallas, and they did. And then, of course, Dallas gets shut out 23-0. And, kind of got, I think, a little bit overrated and overvalued in at least in the perception, at least in the coverage of this league, this 24/7 coverage. But, for the Colts in that aspect, that was the easy game to get up for. Was to get up for a big-time team that was at least, hot and looking like that they were, at least on paper, for real. But now this is actually the tougher game for them, even though they're playing a worse team that's out of the playoffs and in playing the Giants. And, this is an awful high line. I mean, there is maybe the thought that some of the Colts might be motivated, especially Darius Leonard, who looks to me like he should be the defensive rookie of the year and wasn't even selected for the Pro Bowl, which is another story and totally ridiculous. But, I mean, do you have these guys motivated for that, or is it, hey, we've now got an easy game here, we just got to get through this, and then, with the rematch at Tennessee to close out the season, where you have at least a probability of those teams both being 9-6 and battling for the playoffs, because they're behind Baltimore in the AFC for the conference record tiebreaker. But Baltimore could very well go lose at the Chargers this week. So then you have the Colts and Tennessee at 9-6, that would essentially, if that were to happen, essentially battle for the playoff spot. But this number to me though does look, a little bit high. Just simply because the Colts have to come off that high of beating Dallas and then have the more difficult spot playing a worse team the next week, and then have to get up again for that.
Well, and you also kind of wonder, too, look, Tennessee should beat Washington. They're a double-digit favorite. Washington, look, they beat Jacksonville last week. Kudos to them for that. I think that says more about where Jacksonville is than where Washington is. So Tennessee should win the early game. Then you've got that big Baltimore game late on Saturday. Then Indianapolis is going to know exactly where they stand on Sunday. And if Baltimore loses to the Chargers, that is basically a playoff win in your in game against Tennessee. So do we see this line increase at that point? Does the spot become a little bit different for Indianapolis? Because if you're Frank Reich and you've got a win in your in playoff game next week, the last thing you want to do is get Andrew Luck hurt in this game somehow. So does that change the play calling? Do they get a little bit more conservative? Are they looking to cover the number, or are they looking to win and get out? I think that's a tough game, because I think what happens on Saturday could very well dictate some of the mindset for the Colts on Sunday.
Right, and also, maybe not as much. More so what you're saying could potentially change a line. But, with the Giants, too, if Beckham, can give it a go, now, it's not like if he could give it a go, the line is going to crash 3 points. You might see maybe a half-point move or something like that. But, people will bet on straight injury information. So, I think that the scenario could very well increase the line if the Saturday games play out the way that at least the odds makers currently think that they're going to play out, with the teams that are favored both winning. So, that could very well change it. So, it's going to be interesting to see if that does change. But I know if I'm taking this game, I'm probably taking the Giants just because of the size of the line on the Colts.
Well, and what's so interesting now about this game is that contest lines come out on Wednesday. And we're probably going to run into a situation where if Saturday plays out as expected, and if Odell Beckham Jr. doesn't play for the Giants, this number on Sunday is probably 10.5-ish, but it's going to be 9, maybe 9.5 at most in the contest lines. So for me, as somebody thinking, in terms of the same mindset that you are, that this line is a little bit high, that, maybe Indianapolis isn't as mobilized to go out there and win this game comfortably, I would want to take the Giants in that spot, but it's also hard to take 9, knowing that it's probably 10.5 on Sunday. So I'm losing a little bit of line value there. Maybe other people looking to take a little bit of line value and take the shot on Indianapolis. So it's also a really complex contest game as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it becomes a timing game. I mean, in terms of, like if you look at what we talked about with Cincinnati and Cleveland, if you take 8.5 instead of 9, big deal. Or you take 8.5 instead of 9.5. Those are really more dead numbers. I mean, you're not really missing much. Same thing as if I only took 4.5 and I could have had 5 or 5.5. That's not as big of a deal. But if you can get double digits on a big round double-digit number like 10 or maybe even higher, then, yeah, that's a hell of a lot better than taking 9 or 9.5. So, there's a couple games in terms of, from a contest perspective, I mean, the lines are static or stationary, but in terms of what's in your pocket, I mean, there may be a couple games you got to wait on this week.
Well, and there's one more game I want to touch on specifically here with a situation like that. For right now, it looks like Cam Newton is going to play on Sunday, but that is a line that was off the board for a little while yesterday. We're still not fully sure if the Panthers are going to send Cam Newton out. At least I haven't seen any confirmation that he's definitely going to play. Certainly, Carolina has no reason to send him out there. And that's a situation where if Cam Newton doesn't play, Atlanta goes from a 3-point dog to probably a 3-point favorite in that game. So that's another one from a contest standpoint where it's probably going to come out 2.5 here today. If the Panthers have a change of heart and decide, you know what, we're not going to risk Cam Newton, that's a game where all of a sudden you've got to look at line value. If you're in any kind of super contest pool, bowl contest, whatever else, or not bowl contest, but, ATS pool, something like that, straight up pick'em pool. That's something you got to consider here too, where, if Carolina decides to sit Cam Newton, and we've already seen Detroit say, we're not going to use Kerryon Johnson this week, they won't be the only team to do it. There will be other teams that say, we're not going to put so-and-so at risk. Maybe the Rams don't send Todd Gurley out there the last 2 weeks. Would anyone fault them for that? Absolutely not. So it's very interesting, the timing of hitting the market here. And, I don't think there's a whole lot of value in jumping out and grabbing these early numbers here at this time of the year.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, and I haven't, very rarely in the last few weeks, maybe have one play or something during the week and then, looking at adding stuff, maybe more late in the week, like on Friday or Saturday or even game day. And, I think with some of these teams, you got to wait. I mean, clearly now I'm just looking as we're talking, Green Bay and the Jets got taken off the board on Monday, and then it got put back on, and now it's taken back off because Rodgers might be questionable. So, I mean, now that's a game that, you have two teams that aren't going to make it in the playoffs. I think there's 2 games on the schedule where both teams are eliminated officially, Green Bay and the Jets, and then the Raiders and Denver. But these games do still count, and you still have to look at them and not just ignore them because they don't have playoff implications. But yeah, you're seeing all these injuries that are going to affect the numbers. So it's all about timing, I think, here. And I think using that Green Bay Jets game as an example, I mean, clearly the Rodgers thing affects the number, but what also affects the number is that look like they're playing a little better. And Sam Darnold played very well against Houston. They just, they didn't get the win, and he doesn't have a lot around him. But I think that's affecting the line just as much as maybe a Rodgers injury, and maybe that Green Bay is probably, could potentially float it in the rest of the season.
All right, we'll shift gears in a pretty dramatic way here, and I want to talk about handicapping around the holidays, and let's start with college basketball, because I think the NBA and the NHL can kind of be grouped together a little bit. But in college basketball, these are, 18 to 22-year-old kids. Most of them don't have families. They may have a significant other. A lot of them, at least a high percentage of them, don't have children. So the holiday is a little bit different for them. Also, you kind of go from all over the country to play college athletics, so maybe you're not around your family anyway. Do the holidays really change anything for you in terms of handicapping college hoops?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, there's going to be big games on Saturday because you happen to have a weekend fall before Christmas. But these games, especially a lot on the weekdays, right before Christmas or right after Christmas. I mean, usually a coach, in terms of a home game, you're going to have an inferior opponent because that game is for the coach. The game right before or right around Christmas, usually, if you're not playing in one of these made-for-TV tournaments like that Classic that they have this weekend that CBS is televising, you want to play a team that you can beat because the last thing the coach wants to do is be unhappy on Christmas and have to practice guys hard and kind of be a hard ass around the holidays. They want to be able to say, hey, if the guys are staying here, to invite them over for Christmas, or if guys are maybe going home with teammates who live nearby, or able to actually go home for a couple days, that's what they want to be doing. So that's why you see a lot of these games, where you have big conference opponent against smaller conference opponent because they want to get a win. And the smaller conference opponent is going to take this as an opportunity that, hey, we get to go play at a big-time school on the road. So they take that, as an opportunity and games. But, I mean, I don't know really how much it changes because, I mean, I think people, kids are kind of used to this where it's like, okay, I go to college in Ohio, but I'm from New York. Well, I got a teammate that's from Ohio, so I'm going over to his house for Christmas. So, I mean, guys make arrangements, or are able to do what they want to do or to have options.
Well, here's something I was kind of wondering about when I sent you over some notes for the show here. I just kind of crossed my mind a little bit. Take a team like Duke, for example. Duke, a nationally recruiting program. They have one kid from North Carolina on their roster, and Zion Williamson, who's from South Carolina. Spartanburg's not that far away from Durham, probably about 2.5, 3 hours or so. But, in terms of local kids, really not many. UNC Wilmington, on the other hand, six kids that call North Carolina their home state. So what about that sort of dynamic and maybe that dichotomy of, for a national blue blood program, doesn't matter. You're away from your family anyway because you're going to play at a premier school. Whereas at some of these smaller schools, you actually do have the chance to go home for the holidays. And a lot of these kids probably do. And as you mentioned, we'll take teammates with them. So what about that? I mean, do you feel like the holidays affect, maybe smaller conference schools a little bit more because, they can actually be home for the holidays?
I suppose it could in terms of, where they've been or whatnot. And then you have a lot of these, whether it's middle major or really smaller conference schools where they've played on the road like several games in a row. So now, they might get a home game, maybe they're playing a D2 opponent or something like that where they'll actually, get a home game instead of going and playing on the road. But I mean, some of these teams, every year that play these brutal road schedules, I think get used to it. Like a Texas Southern is usually an example in years past, even though they're on the road tonight at Lamar, so they're in state, not very far from home, Houston to Beaumont. But I mean, you have a lot, I think it can affect some of these schools just simply because of being either road weary, or do they take it as the challenge of, really embracing the fact that they're going on the road to play all these teams and, kind of manufacture, I guess, in their minds, an us against the world mentality of having to go on the road all the time. So, I think there's something to that in terms of being, having the road games or this, the holiday season affect smaller conference schools maybe more than bigger conference schools.
All right, let's go to the NBA next because the NBA off on Christmas Eve, then you've got games on Christmas Day. So there are a lot of teams and a lot of players that will be away from their families. What about the NBA? I mean, is it just, it just comes with the territory? It just is what it is?
I think it really is. I mean, I think with the NBA, there's a lot more planning, and these guys are accustomed, I guess, to a little bit more of a different lifestyle. These teams have chefs, and they have food on the plane, and good food, or they eat together or have a restaurant, and they stay in nice hotels. These guys aren't staying, just at random motels off the highway. I mean, these guys are staying at nice places. So, the team play, I think, because their job is to play basketball and to stay in shape and do their physical therapy and do their training and whatnot, these franchises have planning, and they have player relations people, and they have a lot more planning, I think, for these trips, so that these guys really don't have to worry about holiday plans or holiday meals or whatever. So these guys are taken care of. So I don't think it affects the NBA guys near as much.
Yeah, and I think for the NBA too, I mean, like I said, it just kind of comes with the territory. And the difference between the NBA here and the NHL is that the NHL is off for 3 days. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the day after Christmas. I'll have to pull this up in my situational article. I think there's only one team that really can't be home for Christmas because of playing an away game on Sunday and then playing another away game on Wednesday or on Wednesday, or on Thursday, whatever the hell it is, just because they're so far away from home that logistically it would be very, very difficult for them to come all the way back. So I think that's a little bit of a different spot because you're getting 3 days off. You have a chance to be home for the holidays. So I think that could be an angle that really works in our favor over the weekend where teams wrapping up road trips or something like that know there's a break coming and know there's time with the family coming. I think that's a good spot to fade some of those teams.
Sure. Absolutely right. I totally agree with that.
So I guess the last question I would ask you here about the NHL would be then, real quickly, what about coming off of the break? You get into these rhythms of playing day after day after day, then you have 3 days off. So what about that, trying to get back into the flow?
Yeah, that makes it, I think, a little bit harder than you would think. And I mean, so those could be days where, maybe I play a lot fewer plays. I mean, I looked at the holiday, the finals break last week, it could be a little bit hard to determine, okay, who's going to come out ready to play and who is not. So, I think those are spots where you got to be a little bit leery, I guess, or a little bit more picky in terms of handicapping your games and seeing which games you're going to go to the window on.
Wes Reynolds, who's working in fall on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number one. Appreciate the time as always, Wes. Thank you so much, man. Happy holidays to you and yours, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Same to you, partner. Take care.